Okay, we're up to part 3. Beginning of part 3, Ramchal describes how creatures are built. In particular, he's concerned with vegetation, animals, and people. Now, I want to lay out the general picture before I go into the details. The word chai in Hebrew, which is translated as alive, does not refer to vegetation. According to Hebrew, chai is only animals and up. Now, as you know, vegetation has certain processes that are associated with it, and animals have those processes plus more. Vegetation absorbs energy from the environment, grows, reproduces. Animals absorb energy from the environment and grow and reproduce and have sensation and have motion. Certain animals have even what Hebrew vocabulary calls rotzon, which is will. What they don't have is free will. But they do act. Animals seek things that they need, and they flee things that are dangerous to them. So they perceive both the external environment and their internal state, and they do things on the basis of what they perceive. That can be called action. It can be called will. But the crucial thing is that an animal, under various circumstances, that does something, there's nothing else it could have done. That's why you could talk about it having will, but not free will. I have seen translations of the Guide of the Perplexed by Maimonides where they don't make this distinction. Friedlander, who's very good in general, makes this mistake. And because he saw the Rambam use the word rotzon, or the Arabic equivalent, for animals, he writes that animals have free will, but that's not true. The Rambam never writes freedom by animals, just will. So you start with animals that have absorbing energy and growing and reproducing, and animals have that plus perception and motion and will. In addition to, and a certain, as he will say, a certain level of intellect. Animals can solve problems. And then in addition to all of that, human beings have what could be called a divine soul, which has certain connections to higher elements of creation and so forth and so on. Now, when you take the human being that has all the capabilities of the vegetation and the animals, plus more, there are two ways to describe the human being, two possibilities, which actually are mentioned in the Rishonim. One is to say, well, a human being absorbs energy from the environment and grows and reproduces like plants do, with the same type of qualities that plants do, same type of abilities that plants have. And human beings perceive and move and act as animals do. They have those animal qualities also. And then in addition to that, they have a divine soul, which gives them more other different capabilities. So human being is really vegetation function, animal function, plus something higher. That is one possibility, and that's the one that the Ramchal takes here. He says it explicitly. Maimonides has a different view, and when you take into account Maimonides being a philosopher, it's a view which I think you should find quite surprising. He says, when you come to a human being, the picture is false. Human being has what we would call a divine soul, and the divine soul is in charge of everything. It's in charge of everything. It's in charge of growth. It's in charge of absorbing energy of the environment. It's in charge of perception. It's in charge of motion. It's all a product of the divine soul. A human being has nothing in common with an animal and nothing in common with a plant. Nothing. It's a single one-dimensional production. That the Ramchal does not accept here. Why, I don't know. I've told some of you over and over again that the Ramchal seems to follow the Rambam in many, many things, but here he doesn't follow it. Okay, now let's go through in a little detail. He starts off by reminding us that human being is the only creature that is a combination of two different elements coming from different realms. One is a body, which is a physical thing, and the other is the soul, which is a non-physical thing. Only a human being is a combination in that way, which means immediately that no animal has a divine soul, because then it would be a combination. As an animal, just like the human body, is wholly physical. Even its life force is wholly physical. Now he says, the nefesh, which is the life force of the animals, it is a physical entity, extremely refined, extremely difficult to detect. It is carried by the semen, and when the body grows, that character grows with it as well, and it builds it's responsible for embryology, it's for all of the developments in utero, differentiation of cell types and organization of the body. And it continues to direct growth after birth. And it provides the animal with its ability for sensation, perception, and also the intelligence that is appropriate for each species of animals. Now, I just want to make a couple of prejudicial remarks here. On the one hand, there's no question that animals have intelligence. You take a chimpanzee, and inexperienced with any human characteristics or environment, you put it in a room, hang bananas from the ceiling, and put on one end of the room a table, and another end of the room a chair, and at least some of them will push the table under the bananas and push the chair over the table, climb up on the chair, climb up on the table, and take down the bananas. That's problem solving. That's intelligence. Even if they've never seen them before, if they are given experience that they're movable, and they may find that out by themselves. That's pretty well known. What many people don't know is that birds are very smart, and there are problems that birds solve that chimpanzees don't. I'm not talking about a phylogenetic tree and shared ancestry and all the rest of that. We don't share ancestors with crows very close, very nearly back on the phylogenetic tree. You put a piece of food under a barrier with a hole where a tool could be reached in to pull out the thing. If you give it to a chimpanzee, and you give it to it's a handle with a U at the end, like this. And you give it to him, he puts it in, and he tries to pull out the food. But of course, the spread between the legs of the pole is much bigger than the size of the food. And he pulls, and he pulls, and he pulls, and he doesn't get it because the hole is too big. You give it to a crow, the crow turns it over and uses the flat thing and pulls it out. So the crows are quite smart, sometimes smarter than chimpanzees. So there's no question, by the way, birds can teach each other new techniques. In Britain, they had bottles of milk that they delivered to the doorstep of houses, and I forget which type of bird it is, that figured out how to open those bottles, and then all of a sudden, all over, they were all doing the same thing. Because they imitated each other, or they somehow communicated, showed them how to do it. There are all sorts of things going on in the animal kingdom. Now, it says Ramchal, that's called nefesh. In his vocabulary, it's called nefesh. Nefesh is the thing that gives the life force to the creature. And it's completely physical, and human beings have that also. So human beings can learn from experience. If we weren't able to learn which berries are nutritious and which berries are poisonous, the species probably wouldn't last very long. If we didn't figure out ways to avoid the saber-toothed tigers, we'd also have trouble reproducing. So this type of intelligence is possessed by human beings in just the way that it's possessed by animals. Of course, each animal is different. Each creature is different, has different variations on these capabilities, but the natural animal intelligence of a human being isn't different in type from the natural animal intelligence of various different species of animals. Okay. And then, of course, the intelligence of each animal, each creature, depends upon its physical capabilities. Those with very sharp sight, of which there are many, will be able to notice and associate things in the environment, but in terms of their visual qualities. And those who don't have that will rely on olfactory perception, sense of smell, or hearing, and therefore the way the intelligence will manifest itself will be different. Then, in addition to that, there's another existence, and he calls it nafshi. So he uses the word nefesh twice. This is very important to keep in mind. My oldest son mentioned this to me many years ago, that the nefesh the lower nefesh is part of the body. It's a physical thing, and it carries the qualities of growth and for animal sensation and intelligence. And then of what you could call the divine soul, or the spiritual soul, which isn't physical, it has various levels, and the bottom level of it is also called nefesh. So when you see the word nefesh, you have to ask yourself, which nefesh are we talking about? And one of the reasons why they both have the same name, I should say, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The word nefesh is a general term and a specific term also. And, sort of like man, M-A-N. M-A-N can be a name for the human species, and M-A-N can be the name for the male sex. Yeah, the male sex. I said it. You can quote me. Now, and in context, you have to know in the context which it means. So here, the word nefesh can mean the whole of the spirituality of a human being, but it also there's the bottom rung of that spirituality, above which there are four more, as he will recite in the text. So these two things called nefesh are in direct contact with one another. The lowest part of the spirituality of a human being is called nefesh. The highest part of the physical body is called nefesh, and they're in contact with one another because the lowest part of a human being's spirituality is connected to the body and its functions. But as I said, that means you end up with two. Now, this bottom element of spirituality is a two-way street. One is that it carries influence from above to the body, and it also carries from the body up. Put in something now which we have the name of Moshe Shapiro and other Kabbalistic sources, but I think it's important to know. Here you have the spirituality of the person and the physicality. And as we said weeks ago, they have different orientations, they have different motivations, and the reason we have free will is because they conflict. Free will only applies when there's conflict in motivations. Where's free will? If you have the spirituality on this side, physicality on that side, and they conflict with one another, and then the free will has to make the decision between the motivation of the spiritual for the holy, the sublime, the true, the beautiful, or the motivation of the body for the desirable and the pleasurable, or the revenge, and so forth and so on. Where does the free will fit? So one picture is this. The spirituality of a human being has 5 sections, 5 levels, the bottom of which I told you is called nefesh, again. And then above that are 2 more that are common, ruach and neshama, which are words that are used in the Tanakh over and over again, and used in common parlance over and over again. And above that, there are two more, which are part of Kabbalah, called Chai and Yechida. And the way free will works is this. The bottom part of the spirituality, which is nefesh, directs the body and also takes information from the body, takes input from the body. Skipping over ruach for a moment, you go to what's called neshama in this picture. Neshama is where the intellect is. Neshama is where the appreciation of the good and the right and the beautiful and the holy it lies. And therefore, nefesh below, receiving influence of the body, has motivations for the physical. Neshama above takes its motivations and its focus from what's above, the holy. Ruach sits in between. Ruach takes inputs from both of them, from the body below and from the neshama above. And because it takes inputs from both of them, Ruach is where free will lives. That's where decisions are made. So, that's a picture of how the structure works in this respect. Now, the Ramchal says, what does a human being have from this spiritual soul which no other creature has? He has connection with the higher elements in the creation, direct connections, which nothing else has. Let's review. The creation works in a hierarchical system. At the very top, there are certain divine energies, created things, like tables and like angels and like human souls. This divine energy is a created thing. It's not divine, it's a creation, it's a creature. But it has, it carries the directions, the DNA, so to speak, the program for the development of the world. And then that highest divine energy filters down through intermediaries, some of which, in the bottom level of which are called angels, until that energy finally reaches to the physical world, and it sustains the existence of the physical world and directs the operation of the physical world. There is this hierarchical structure. And, as he says explicitly, at least twice, and this is absolutely crucial, God, so to speak, sits at the top and at every intermediary stage. God is present at all levels of the hierarchy. Nothing operates on its own. God is on vacation. He doesn't check in only on Mondays and Thursdays. He's present and directing every level of the hierarchy. He knows everything there is to know about that level, and he directs every action that takes place there. So you say, well, if he's doing that, what does he need the hierarchy for? Well, he doesn't need it to give himself vacation time. He doesn't need it to minimize effort. All these things for him are possessed in infinity. He needs it only for the purpose of categorizing, specifying, delineating the types of divine action that are going to happen at each stage. And he categorizes and defines them and delineates them for the purpose of enabling us to understand them. He wants us to understand what he does, because he wants to have a relationship, a mutual understanding with us. If he operated the world out of his infinity, we wouldn't understand anything. Our minds aren't rich enough and broad enough to capture principles that are based on infinity. So he, from his own side, we would say voluntarily, he chooses to limit the way in which he operates so that the way he creates our minds and the way he operates have a natural association with one another. And by the way, this idea answers a problem which philosophers and even some scientists have recognized. According to the naturalistic picture of the development of human beings, there is no reason whatsoever to think that the human brain can comprehend the universe. There's absolutely no reason to think that. Yeah, we'd better be able to tell which berries are poisonous, which berries are nutritious. We better be able to escape the saber-toothed tiger, but to figure out why stars shine? What in the development of a human being would give you a hint that human intellectual capacities would be accurate to figure out why stars shine? Or to define and prove theorems about infinity, or values, or anything else. It's just not in the program. One, I think it was Einstein who said the most astonishing thing about the universe is that it's understandable at all. In natural terms, no one has an explanation for that. And of course, if you're going to do science, you have to believe that. Otherwise, you're just doing something that you have no reason to think will be success. So here, what we're being told is that since God wants us to understand, He made the human mind in such a way, built in such a way that His actions within the world are understandable. That at least is an explanation of why it's so. Otherwise, to date anyway, there's no explanation for it. So, now, everything else in the world lives at the bottom of the hierarchy. There are influences that come down through the hierarchy, in the way that I just described, which maintain everything's existence. That's galaxies and squirrels and peanuts and mosquitoes and angels and human souls and the whole of the gamut of creation, and directs their activities so that it's, in that respect, it's like a game of solitaire. The only agent is really God, and these are the things that happen through his agency. Human beings are the only exception to this picture. We live at the bottom of the hierarchy in a certain sense also. Our lives and our existence and our energy and so forth and so on are dictated to us by the downward flow. But we are also given the capability of, number one, acting on our own. That's free will. And with free will, it means that some of the things we do aren't the result of flow down the hierarchy. Some of the things we do start with us. They don't come from anywhere else. By the way, as I said to some of you, the word free in free will means free from external causation. In particular, it means free from divine causation. The particular action you choose with free will isn't a result of divine causation. And that's why you're responsible for it. Otherwise, you'd be a plaything. But more than that, we are connected to the higher elements in this hierarchy through the elements of the human soul, which has these higher levels, which are directly related to them. So not only can we, at the bottom of the hierarchy, act horizontally by making free choices, thereby moving our bodies in various ways, and those bodily motions interact with other things on the bottom level, and then indirectly, since they're on the bottom level and they're all connected to the higher levels, if you shake one of these things at the bottom level, that can send reverberations up the tree of influences. But the higher levels of the human soul connect directly to higher elements. So human beings, so to speak, can reach out and grab hold of a higher section of the hierarchy and give it a shake directly to itself. And that will send reverberations down the tree and also somewhat up the tree, and has the ability to interact with them that way. Mitzvahs, when you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah has an effect on the hierarchy of forces coming into the world. And it can have an interaction not just on the lower level, but on higher levels. So that contact is mediated by the divine soul, and that's what happens. That's one of the things that the divine soul does for the human being. Are we together so far? Yeah? Okay. Now, the consequence of the soul, the divine soul, being associated with the body, consequences are quite substantial. Now at this point, he's talking about our existence post the transgression in the Garden of Eden and post expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Let me tell you what he says about it here. Whether we'll go back to that prior stage of history or not, I'm not sure. This body and this environment won't tolerate high-level integration of soul and body. The soul's powers are so great that were it to be strongly and largely integrated into the body, that means functionally, the body would evaporate. It's like what happens to poor, unsuspecting Americans, including me, when you bring appliances from the United States, you plug them into the wall here without a transformer, they fry. because it's 110 compliance for a 220 electricity, and that's not good. Here, the body would just fry. It would not be able to hold it. So the contact between soul and body is at the extremity of the soul. Of course, the soul is a single whole, so that the higher elements can operate through the extremity, which is connected to the body. But because it has to go through the extremity, it's like a step-down transformer, where the power is very greatly reduced. So the interaction with the body is very greatly reduced. Now, the interaction is two-way, because when a person performs a mitzvah performed by the person, a person is soul and a body together. Don't make mistake of thinking that a person is a soul riding around in a body. Maybe Maimonides holds that, but the Ramchal, none of the Kabbalists hold that, and many other philosophers don't hold it. It's performed by a human being, so soul and body are both involved, so soul and body are both affected by it, but because a considerable majority of the soul isn't in direct contact with the body, the effect on the soul is unconscious. Consciousness is mediated by the body. And also, the soul has effects on the body which may be conscious in the sense that they cause conscious experiences, but they're unconscious in the sense that we don't know where those experiences are coming from. As we will see, dreams fall into this category. In fact, one of the influences that produces dreams is those parts of the soul that are out of direct contact. But that isn't all that produces dreams. Some physical features of your body produce dreams. So that if you say, well, here's a conscious effect of the soul of the body, that's true, but the consciousness is limited only to the effect. There's no consciousness of the cause. So it's just something that happens. We know because of the tradition where it's coming from, but there's nothing in the consciousness of the person. And he gives an example. I don't know if everybody would agree with this example. I haven't seen other people comment on it. But he says, the Talmud tells us that on Shabbos we have an extra measure of soul, Shom and Yisera. And he says, no one is conscious of it. You're not conscious of its arrival. You're not conscious of its departure, which is just a symptom of the fact that there are elements of soul which really are there and really are interacting, but you're not conscious of it. And I want to add here what says in the Talmud about this situation. The Talmud considered the case of a person who's traveling through the wilderness and is water deprived and tired and confused, and he loses track of the days. So he doesn't know which day is Shabbos. What should he do? So the Talmud says the following. Number one, as far as the forbidden categories of constructive physical behavior on Shabbos, since that is prohibited biblically, he should minimize that every day. Of course, if you need to protect and save your life, then you could violate it. But every day is the same. Minimize it as much as possible because today might be Shabbos. But if he does just that, every day is going to be the same. And there'll be nothing to mark out that 1/7 of the week has special positive character, like in Kiddush and other things. So the rabbi said, one day a week he ought to perform the positive mitzvahs of Shabbos. Of course, which day is that? Flip a coin? So there are two views. One view is that when he realizes that he's confused, that night, right away, he should perform the positive actions of Shabbos to mark it off, and then every 6 days later, should try to keep better track. And the other says that he should start counting. Today is 1, tomorrow is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and make the 7th day Shabbos. Both of these views are supported by explicit verses in the Torah. When was Adam created? Friday. Erev Shabbos. He was created, that night was Shabbos. So the one says, do it like Adam. Take it from him and imitate his experience of Shabbos. The other is based on the 10 pronouncements at Sinai. 6 days shall you labor, which means you have permission to labor. Don't let anybody tell you that digging holes in the garden is a mitzvah. God commanded me to do it, and I'm going to get reward for it because he said 6 days shall you labor. It's only a permission slip. It's not a mitzvah to do that. You should perform the activities for 6 days. On the seventh day, of course, minimal, but then you should make Kiddush on the seventh day, just as it says in the ten pronouncements of Sinai. Nobody says, just meditate and feel it. Feel it. When it comes, when you feel the extra soul, then you'll know that it's Shabbos. Nobody says that. Nobody says that. The presumption is, nobody's going to know. So that's what the Ramchal is saying, that you don't have conscious experience of this, and there are many, many other areas of the soul from which of which you don't have conscious experience. That doesn't mean they aren't there, and it doesn't mean that they aren't real, and that they aren't really interacting. And that sounds very mystical and suspicious because it's coming from a religious source. Let me just remind you that your brain processes are almost all unconscious. Almost all totally unconscious. You may have heard you have about 86 billion neurons in your brain, which are performing information processing all the time, even when you're asleep, and you're certainly unconscious of that. Well, guess what? That's only half. There are also cells called glial cells, of which there are about another 86 billion, and it was discovered a year ago that they also perform information processing. It was used to think that they were just cleaning up waste and lubrication and so forth and so on. No, so it's really 176 billion, and who knows which other ones are there that they haven't discovered yet, right? Almost everything that goes on in the brain is unconscious. That doesn't mean it isn't real, does it? I don't think so. It's real, all right, just not conscious. The soul also has these functions going on continuously, which aren't conscious. Yes?
So, we could interpret perhaps that the intelligence is the highest part of the animal soul, and that's the link between, so to speak, our conscious mind and the second soul, like our spiritual soul. Like that's how we understand. Like understanding is like that bridge between the higher soul and the body. Like that's why understanding is so important, because it's a way to at least make it conscious. So to speak.
Let's see now. You're stressing consciousness. I don't remember that the Ramchal ever uses the word for consciousness. I remember that he singles out consciousness as the element that performs the link. Here he used the word nefesh for the lower part, that which animals have as well. It is what gives it life. Life includes a lot of things. It includes consciousness, but it includes growth, it includes nutrition, it includes perception, it includes action. By the way, there's unconscious perception. It's maybe here the psychologists have a word which is sort of in normal natural vocabulary sitting on a borderline. But for example, there's something called Blindside, where a person says, "I've become blind in my right eye. If I close my left eye, I don't see anything." And you test him, you shine flashes and everything else, and he doesn't respond. And they say, "Okay, we'd like to try something. We're going to close your right eye." He reports being blind in his right eye. So we say to him, we cover his left eye, and we say, "What do you see?" He says, "I don't see anything." Okay, we're going to put things in front of your right eye. We want you to guess. Just guess. What is it? Put a pencil, an orange, a coin, right? One after the other. And he's right 70% of the time. 70% of the time. What's going on? If he can't see out of that eye, why is he right? Ever. And the answer is something called blindside, which means that although input is going in through the eye, and the input is getting to the brain where it can be categorized, it's unconscious. He's not conscious of the fact that the information is coming in. This is also something the nefesh is doing. So nefesh is not restricted to or tied to specifically to consciousness. And now the nefesh that keeps the animal part of the animals in general, or the body of the human being alive, that is what's connected to the spiritual nefesh.
The intelligence?
No, I didn't say intelligence. I said nefesh. Nefesh is the life of the body. The life of the body is given by a physical thing called nefesh. That nefesh is what keeps the body alive. Of course, a live body does lots of things. They're all rooted in this nefesh, but they're all rooted in the nefesh. Growth is rooted just as much as consciousness is rooted. Consciousness isn't special in that respect. They're all the same. They all come from this nefesh. And then the nefesh of the soul is related to that nefesh in all of its capabilities, in all of its characteristics. So it isn't consciousness per se that mediates between the animal soul, which is below, and the divine soul, which is above. It's the whole package. It's the whole package. Yeah.
This might be better for the Q&A, but maybe it's kind of relevant. Like when we dream, there's this idea that our intellectual soul is interacting in the spiritual realm and sending messages to us while we sleep. Might be understanding that incorrectly, but I feel like animals also dream or have nightmares. So I'm wondering if my assumption is correct. What is interacting in the spiritual realm for animals that's causing them to have nightmares if they don't have that soul as well?
Okay, so first of all, I would caution you to be circumspect about talking about animals having dreams. There's an enormous amount of anthropomorphism going on with respect to animals. You see similar behaviors and you assume human capacities for animals. This is rife in academia. Proto-morality and all the rest. I will tell you what Hilary Putnam at Harvard, professor of philosophy, famous professor of philosophy, pointed out in this regard. Do dogs understand what meat is? And you say, come on, they identify it, they interact with it in specific ways, they make appropriate use of meat. Of course they do. Oh, really? Dogs understand what meat is. Well, imagine this. A new steakhouse opens in your locale, a top quality steakhouse, and everybody goes and they enjoy it and it's really terrific. 3 months later, there's an expose. It's really soy. They're just really good at fixing soy, right? It tastes like steak. It smells like steak. It chews like steak. It's just soy. So you say, well, then it's fraud, right? Go there, you get double your money back. They go bankrupt, they go bankrupt. You've been defrauded. You've been deceived. Go explain that to a dog. If it tastes like meat and it smells like meat, it chews like meat, that's all the dog has. That's not the definition of meat. The dog does not understand what meat is. So we have a lot of that projection on animals and lower creatures of human characteristics, which is inappropriate. But worse than that, for the question that you're asking, he points out, says quite clearly, some dreams are due to what you ate. Some dreams are due to what you experienced during the day, both of which apply to animals directly. So if you ask where the dreams would come from, there's no question. They're not only produced by interaction of the divine soul with higher powers. That's not the only source of dreams. And then he says that with the interaction with higher powers, there are at least 2 different categories of higher powers, some of which deliver truth and some of which deliver falsehoods. And therefore, he says, it's extremely difficult from a dream to pick out the one genuine element from which you could learn something true from all the rest of the riffraff, the chaff, which is discardable. And that's why it's very difficult to read dreams. Even for Uncle Sigmund, with all of his fame and all of his egregious errors, it's quite difficult to read dreams. So I think that the problem won't seriously be a problem. But from comparative brain studies and everything else, be very, very careful about these. And by the way, academia is rife with a a lack of caution, a lack of critical attention, and also fraud. With respect to this issue, one professor at Harvard had to retire because he was guilty of misinterpreting his own results. He gave rules for interpretation to his graduate students, and then he didn't follow the rules. This is on record. Because he was proving that animals have morality, and therefore morality just evolves, and therefore human beings aren't special, and that's the thing that gets you a ticket to tenure and international conferences, because that's what people want to hear, because they're pushing a materialist agenda. And unfortunately, he was a Jewish fellow, and he had to retire because he pushed the agenda. So I would caution you to be very cautious about that.
So can we say that achieving perfections reflect the properties of the higher soul into the lower soul?
I think that achieving perfection, first of all, the concept of perfection will be a specifically human concept. You know, Harry Frankfurt was a very famous 20th century philosopher, very good philosopher. Developed a whole philosophy of psychology, which I'll spare you, although it's recorded, where he talked about a human being having motivation to change his motivations. I wish I didn't fly off the handle. I wish I didn't get angry. That's a motivation to have different motivations. When he gets angry, a certain motivation is being triggered, and he's doing that. And as he said, there's no evidence whatsoever that any animal has the concept of perceiving and evaluating its own motivational structure. So it's an example of a concept which is uniquely human. This idea of perfection means, here's my character, here are my character traits, here's how they're organized, here's how they express themselves in behavior, and it's not right. It's not right. It should be another way. It needs fixing. There's no evidence whatsoever that animals have anything like that. So that I would agree with you. That would be something that's it's a appreciation that resides in the divine soul the human being has, which carries with it its own measure of intellect, which is an entirely different intellect. Actually, not entirely. It's an intellect that has much richer material that's applied to it, and enables it to go beyond experience in unexpected ways, and to address subjects which aren't part of animal existence. So I think that's right. That comes from that higher self. Yeah.
You said that the ruach is like the in between, and that's what bechira is.
Mm-hmm.
So does every animalistic desire, is that bad? Is that always the yitzhar?
With every animal, what? Sorry.
Every animalistic desire of humans, is that always the wrong thing?
Is every animalistic desire of a human being always the wrong thing? Well, the clear, unequivocal answer is yes and no. That is to say, here's a simple way of putting the picture. The animal soul and the animal desires are morally and spiritually blind. So that means that they want what they want when they want it. It might by accident be right. It might also by accident be wrong. If we call this the Yetzer Hara, or a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, it means if you follow that inclination regularly, you will get into trouble. But not every time. Not every time. I'm hungry. I want a sandwich. As far as my animal soul is concerned, it makes no difference whether today is Yom Kippur, it's forbidden to eat, or today is Sukkot and it's a mitzvah to eat. According to my animal soul, it doesn't matter whether it's my sandwich or your sandwich. It makes absolutely no difference. The stomach is satisfied, the taste buds are happy, and it was a wonderful experience. And if you just follow that, you're going to get into trouble. So when I say yes or no, what I mean is this. The animal soul's desires aren't premeditatedly evil. They aren't consciously rebellious, but they're moral and spiritually blind. So they will definitely get you into trouble. That's why they need to be controlled, focused by something above, which does have a consciousness of what's right and what's wrong, what is good and what is evil, because without that, they will definitely get you into trouble. So that, in that sense, they're unrefined in that respect, and therefore they can't be just left to their own devices. But it's not premeditatedly evil. There is a concept in our literature of another force which is premeditatedly evil. It says in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Mayim gnuvim yumtoku. Stolen waters are sweet. They're sweet because they're stolen. I got away with it. I don't like you. You're not going to drink your water. I'm going to drink your water. I want you to suffer. The minute you say, you're thirsty, have some water. I don't want it anymore because I wanted you to suffer. And you're not suffering. So I'm not interested in the water. I only want something to work you. That is a premeditated, perverse evil inclination. And the difference between them is enormous, because the first one you could elevate. You could associate it with the circumstances under which what it wants happens to be a mitzvah. You could train it not to be wild. You could even train it to participate in service of God. The second one seems to be beyond that reach. That just has to be resisted. I'm quoting Rav Dessler now. And if you look at the verses that describe what will happen to these impulses at the end of days, you'll find a split. Some say that they will become allies in service of God, and some say that they will be destroyed and annihilated. And he understands that there are really two forces. The one that's perverse and oppositional will be destroyed, and the one that's blind can be elevated and incorporated. So that's the difference between the two of them. Okay.